Hello, welcome to episode 67 of React Native Radio. I'm your host, Nader Dabbit. Today on our panel, we have Peter Pikarczyk.
Hey, everybody.
Kevin Old.
Hey, everyone.
And today our special guests are Monte Thakkar and Binoy Patel. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us, Nader.
Hey, hello, everyone. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so today our topic is going to be a couple of things. First of all, we're going to talk about React Native elements and how Monte and Binoy have kind of stepped in and how they're kind of basically maintaining the project at this point. But we're also going to talk about sustainable open source. And we're kind of doing some things within React Native community and actually really within the React Native elements itself. We're trying out a few things and we're talking about some stuff. And we're trying to kind of figure out ways to continue to expand the project, add maintainers, just kind of keep it healthy while we're continuing doing our day-to-day jobs. And it's really kind of a discussion that a lot of people are having at this point. It's not just us, but I think we can kind of give a little bit of insight because we're kind of all new to open source. I know this is kind of the first project that I ever launched that got any traction. And Binoy and Monte, I believe this is kind of like their first big project as well that they've worked on. So I think we all kind of have some good insight as beginners. But we also have a little bit of experience at this point, so we can kind of also give our our feedback as far as working on a large project for an extended period of time. I guess before we get into that, Monte, can you go first and kind of give us an introduction to yourself and how you got into programming?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Monte Thakkar, and I'm a software engineer for a startup in SF called Pillar Homes. My first introduction was, I think, back in high school when I first learned C++. And since then, I moved to California for college, and I just graduated last year. And last summer, I interned at the same startup that I work at right now. And that was my first introduction to React Native because my first project there was to work on a couple features on our React Native app. And before that, I'd been doing iOS and Android for about a year.
Okay, Binoy?
So, hey, everyone. I'm currently working at ADP in New Jersey as an application developer. And I'm not really doing React Native at ADP, working more in React side. So I do consulting on the side. That's where I kind of get my React Native experience. Professionally, I haven't really done much React Native besides maintaining React Native elements, but I've been working in JavaScript space for like 5 years, doing internships at various companies, and I recently graduated and kind of just going from there.
Okay, cool. So I guess for those that are listening that haven't heard of React Native Elements, it's basically like a UI toolkit. It started off about 6 to 8 months ago, maybe a year ago now. I don't know exactly when, but it was something I kind of put together over the course of maybe a weekend. And it was very basic at the time. It just had a few different items in it. But I know as a React Native developer and someone that's been doing it for over 2 years at this point, there's certain things that you keep repeating over and over. One of those things for me, the main thing really was just buttons. And normally a button for me would be basically a touchable element, either, touchable highlight or something like that. And then I would normally do the exact same positioning. It would, I would put some text. I would basically wrap some text in the touchable, and then I would center that. And I was like, okay, this is pretty, I'm repeating this so often. Let me go ahead and put this in a package and, upload it to NPM. And then after I did that, I was like, you know what, there's a few other things I can add. I think there was a few social icons, also a list item. I'd seen someone had built a React Native app and had kind of put their design online. And I really liked the list that they got. I don't remember what it was at this point, but I basically copied that design and a few other things and uploaded it to NPM and kind of talked about it on Twitter. And it kind of picked up from there. And over the course of a few months, it got a few thousand stars. People are using it. And I kind of got really busy. And at the time, I believe I had met Monte on a Slack channel for Chain React Conf. I believe that's where it was. And we were both kind of on there. And we were talking and Monte was interested in kind of getting involved with some open source. And I was kind of talking to a few people at the time about getting on some newer projects, but none of that ever really happened. Those projects went on. I wasn't really a part of them. But in the meantime, I asked Monty to kind of step in and see if he could help out with React Native Elements. And since then, I have almost completely not really been involved as far as the actual release cycle for the last couple of months and new features. That's almost been completely taken up by these two guys. So I think it would be cool to kind of talk about, your experiences, I guess, like doing this, like how it's, how it's been, like, and kind of just talk about, what your thoughts were about open source before this and then how they are now, and maybe talk about how you might recommend for other people that are listening to kind of get involved as not beginners, but as people that haven't really done it so far in their career.
Sure. I can go first. So I can give you my side of the story. And I think, as Nader was saying, I reached out to him on Slack, which was late December 2016. And at that point, I'd been developing React Native for about 6 months. And I think a couple of months before that, I ran into a similar problem with, as Nader was saying, with repetitive code in React Native. And I realized that because I had a couple of projects in React Native, and every time I needed a new project, I had to sort of set it up from scratch with the same technologies, right? So for instance, there would be Redux, or there would be a tab navigator, or there would be a side drawer, or there would be React Native Elements. So I sort of found that if I created a template or like a boilerplate out of it, that it would be useful for me. And so that was my first open source project in a sense. And it was called React Native Starter. And so that really got me sort of involved in open source. And I was looking to sort of contribute to bigger projects. And that's when I saw React Native Elements, and I reached out to Nader because I'd used React Native Elements personally and I really enjoyed using it. And so if I could help maintain it, that'd be even better. So I reached out to Nader, and then from that point, I sort of helped with React Native Elements. So I think when I first joined, I think we were on version 0.9, and we had I'd say about 3,500 stars. And over the course of the next few months, we sort of did a lot of bug fixes, new features. And I remember at some point, there were a couple of contributors that were really active, and Binoy was one of them. And so it only made sense to sort of reach out to other people that are active and see if they would, help become core contributors and move the repository along. So I reached out to Binoy, and he was definitely interested in helping out. And so I got Binoy on board as well. And I think we've been sort of working on making the repository, sort of adding new components, fixing bugs, just doing adding some padding around the repository. Like we added a linter, we added a prettier, we put it up on Travis. We added tests on there. So before every release, we can make sure that all the tests pass. Easy way to make sure that we don't have bugs. And we recently did our last release, I think last night, and we're up to version 0.12 right now. And I think for someone that's looking to contribute to open source, the first thing I would do is figure out not just React Native, but figure out which technology you're more interested in, right? Like in my case, it was React Native. And since this is a React Native podcast, I would assume a lot of listeners are more inclined towards React Native. So once you sort of figure out what technology you want to work with, start from like figuring out like how you can make a repository for yourself that'll make your life easier, right? And I think in my case, that was a good way to start because it got me sort of more involved with it. But if not, look for a repository that you sort of use very often. And that'll sort of motivate you to sort of improve the library. And once you do that, definitely reach out to the author because in my experience, like everybody is really nice in the open source community, and everyone's sort of looking to let other people learn and want to teach other people, right? So if you reach out and express interest, I'm sure they would help you sort of, get you on the team or even like help you submit PRs if it's your first time, and you can go from there.
Yeah, kind of to take on from that, I wanted to get involved in open source for a while, and I was kind of looking for which projects to get involved. And I was always interested in the React ecosystem. So I was either React bootstrapped or even React Native Elements. But I think one of the biggest step back for me was the imposter syndrome. Is you feel like it's very complicated and you might not be smart enough to do it. And I think that was one of the things that stopped me from contributing to any open source project. But then I started looking through issues, helping other people. And then he asked if I could work on one of the issues, which was a feature for React Native Elements. And when I first talked about that, I'll do it, I had no clue how to do it because I had never thought about how it would work. But I kind of just took it up and figured out. And Monty to help me with getting a good code review and then kind of helped me boost my confidence. So I think a lot of things, a lot of beginner developers who don't contribute to open source, they face this a lot is they're scared, thinking that they might not be good enough. And I think you just have to do it.
Now that you've been doing it for so long, do you feel the same way? Do you still feel like you have imposter syndrome if you try to take on, a project outside of React Native Elements?
No, definitely not. I mean, I've been commenting on issues on React navigation and even React Native itself. And now I think once you kind of get into doing it, it's definitely it's a confidence booster that you can go to any project, kind of help out and pitch in, make a pull request to kind of help everything out.
That's awesome. So are there any projects that you have in mind that you'd maybe like to tackle in the future? Anything that's on your radar?
Currently, not specific. I've been trying to look through some Facebook open source project like Yarn and React Native itself. Been trying to catch up on issues, but it's always time constrained to do everything.
So say you have, say you're interested, not you personally, but just like, say someone's interested in contributing back, right? And say there's like a ticket or an issue they want to tackle. How does it work for you when it comes to like racing the clock, right? Or, not doing double work because someone comes out with a pull request for the exact same thing that you were going to work on, or you started working on and only got 60% of the way there,
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the major things is communicating in the issues that you're kind of working on it so people don't take it. And I see this happening a lot in the React Native repo is when they're tagged with like a good first task, like they usually get resolved in like an hour or 2 hours. So it's definitely a race to finish it. But I think if you comment on the issue saying that you want to work on it, I think people kind of appreciate that and let you go ahead.
That's really cool. I'm sure it's different from project to project and community to community, but I'm really proud of the React ecosystem, especially when it comes to new contributors. Just because you're faster or, you're a better programmer doesn't mean that you have to tackle every single issue on the board, right?
Yeah. And I think it's a really welcoming community, which is the best part about the whole React and JavaScript community.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting that you mentioned imposter syndrome because when I put up React Native Elements and before I put up anything ever, actually, I was always kind of like afraid that my code would get picked apart and all of that. And now looking back at actually some of my original code, it was pretty terrible, but nobody ever really complained. If anybody like had, something that they could improve, they would just kind of submit a pull request to fix, some bad stuff. But I learned a lot in the process and it kind of has boosted my confidence a lot. I don't know.
When it comes to programming, I feel like having the worst code you're always in the best situation because 15 other people are going to step up and say, well, how about this way? How about that way? It makes them feel good coming up with a better solution, and it makes you feel good because you know what that better solution is now.
Yeah, that's so true. And when someone does kind of show me the better way, it's like, okay, this is awesome because I know this now. And who knows how long it would have taken me to actually learn this on my own.
I know both of you have been maintainers, but have you ever released like your own project, even if it is, something small?
Yeah, so I recently worked on this project called React Native Ratings. And the idea was really simple. It was basically to create a reusable rating component that you see on like WhatsApp review or Yelp, for instance, where you can get input from a user and then do something with it, right? And I would really want to explore the animated API and implement gestures with Band Responder, as I really hadn't worked with that a lot. And so it was a really fun challenge for me to sort of like dive deep into it and see if I can figure it out. And I think in the end, I was pretty happy with how it turned out to be, and I got some really good feedback through stars. So I was pretty happy with it.
For me, I don't really have like any projects that were kind of big, but I did kind of like a lot of boilerplate stuff, which I kind of use. So recently, I built a Restify boilerplate, which would have like integration to testing and everything. So if I'm working on a backend project or even a microservice, I can kind of just take that boilerplate and start working from there.
Yeah, that sounds so cool. I think the best part about open source is when you solve your own problem, whether it's like a boilerplate or a function, and then, like open source it for everybody else to see, even if nobody looks at it, like you've still overcome, the fear of releasing something and being able to abstract, take out of context that module or that component that you built and allow other people to use it right out of the box. I think those are big accomplishments for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing is what a lot of people don't realize is, say, for instance, you build a component that works for your use case, chances are that other people would find it useful too. So instead of just like putting it up on GitHub where you don't really have an NPM module for it, just write up a really simple API that you would use for your application and wrap it with that API and just publish it on NPM, right? You'd actually be surprised how many other people it would be useful to.
So can you talk about managing issues and pull requests and kind of what your workflow is in dealing with those and being responsive to the community?
I mean, for me personally, I kind of look at my GitHub kind of when I wake up and then before I go to sleep, and kind of just look through any issues, and if I could help on anything, that would be quick. Lately, if anyone reports an issue, I try to create a snack demo and kind of show if that recreates, or I also paste a link to it. So if it is an actual bug and someone would try to fix it, they can kind of recreate it easily instead of building the whole React Native application. I think responsiveness to issues and kind of helping people out, I think, is the biggest part of the community. I think we get a lot of people with just questions, and I think we do a good job. Even we have a lot of people who respond to these issues and kind of help each other out.
Yeah, I think one way that I try to approach it is to make sure that we commit to doing a release every week or every week and a half. And what that does is it sort of makes sure that we're staying on top of pull requests and reviewing them and merging them before we do our release. And at the same time, if there's not enough things going into the release, that's sort of an indication that we need to start fixing all of the bugs that are out there that people haven't been contributing towards, or adding new components. So I think so far with almost every major release, we've added either one or two new components, which I think is good to sort of keep the momentum of the repository going.
Yeah, I can definitely say when I was more active at the beginning with this project and with some of my other projects, it really depends, I guess, on kind of, the style of that person and maybe the schedule and all of that. Ideally, I would kind of, especially at first, I would be on there, daily kind of reviewing pull requests and kind of issues and all of that. And then I've found myself lately, because of my schedule and just how hectic things have been, I kind of am like on a weekly schedule, like with some of my other projects. I'll kind of go on there once a week, which is probably not, as good as it should be. But I've recently, kind of freed up a little more time. I'm hoping to kind of do that bi-weekly. But even for me, I think bi-weekly for a project that's not as, I guess, at the scale of React Native Elements kind of works good for me. But I think definitely the pace and the scale of what React Native Elements has been kind of being maintained at is pretty impressive. And I'm really happy kind of with where it's going and how it's being managed. It's pretty impressive to see kind of where it is now compared to where it was even back in November or December. The quality of the code, the quality of the activity, everything is just so much better now.
So can you talk about the architecture that started and kind of how it's morphed into what it is? Has it always been the same architecture? And have you run into any challenges as the project grew?
Well, I can say that the very beginning idea behind it, like I had said earlier, is kind of like creating a single place for a bunch of reusable components that are being used. And I believe after the first publish, I started kind of having some other thoughts about what this could be. And I was thinking like, okay, so there is a few other really nice components that are already out there. What if we had all of these together in one place so people can just kind of install this one project, have a single API to go and reference, and kind of, piggyback off of a couple of really good projects that are already out there. One of them being, I forgot the name of it, but it's an Expo project. I believe it's like a tabs or something like that. But basically, so I grabbed that project, included it in React Native Elements, and that seemed to have been pretty popular because people are kind of maybe new to React Native, or they don't just kind of they don't spend as much time maybe as some of us do, kind of like investigating everything. So it's kind of hard to keep up with everything, really. So having like a one-stop place, in my opinion, was kind of like the goal that I kind of wanted to make React Native Elements. As far as any like architecture or anything like that, it wasn't really that sophisticated. It was more just like a thing that kind of grew, and now it's kind of like, it's kind of much, bigger and better than I would have ever imagined. One thing I have noticed is I've seen a lot of other UI toolkits out there, or a few other ones that are out there, and I think they all serve the need of separate use cases, I guess you would say. The thing that I hope to keep with React Native Elements is kind of like a very easy way and a very simple like way to kind of get started without a lot of like having to wrap providers and themes and all that stuff. I think having that option might be a cool thing to have down the road, but I think having it as like a necessity kind of is a stumbling block or kind of a roadblock for new developers. Trying to kind of like, have to go back maybe if they already have an existing project and kind of wrap all this stuff. Being able to just use React Native Elements, install it, and just kind of drop it into some part of the app and it just works I think it's pretty compelling, and it is, I'm sure it's helped our adoption a lot more than maybe some of the other libraries that are out there.
Absolutely. One other question just about the kind of the internals of React Native Elements. It seems like, the inclusion of the icons, that's probably the only native module that you guys are using. How has that been to work with? And did you run into any issues dealing with native modules in your project?
Yeah, sure. So you're right about that. So React Native Vector, we have a dependency of React Native Vector icons, and that's the only native module that we need. So there's with Exponent right now, there's sort of two ways that users use it, right? One is they use it with vanilla React Native, and in that case, you need to install vector icons separately and then do React Native link. But if you're using it with Exponent or Expo, Expo already handles that for you. So as long as you install React Native Elements, that's pretty much all you need to do.
Yeah, I was wanting to point that out that it's included in Expo, and that's a big thing, I think, because from what I understand, Expo wants to keep their API pretty small. So being able to use React Native Elements inside of an Expo project for me is pretty huge. So kudos to you guys.
Also, I think one of the things that at least I had in mind when we first kind of started is to kind of keep everything cross-platform. That's definitely something we have kind of focused on and talked about in our documentation, that everything should work, cross-platform, iOS and Android at least. And I kind of think that's kind of, something we're always going to be focusing on for everything. So like if you use a component, it should work, across both iOS and Android.
Do you ever plan to expand the cross-platform functionality to the web too? Sort of how React Native for web works?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've definitely thought about it, but I don't think it's on our immediate roadmap. We have an issue that's open on our repository that has a lot of thumbs up on it, and a lot of users definitely find it valuable to have on React Native Web as well. But I don't think we have it on our immediate roadmap right now.
So in the spirit of talking about open source and the different projects, I want to bring up a post from last year. So the maintainer of Moment.js, he basically decided that he wasn't going to participate in open source so much just because the community, there were lots of ups and downs with the community. And I was just wondering from each of your perspectives, what you think, has the community been receptive, and have you had any issues? And if you've had issues, how have you managed those?
As far as kind of like people being kind about talking to us, is that kind of what you're saying?
Certainly. Yeah. So there's events online that where certain communities will, someone will not necessarily participate correctly, and they'll have to implement, guidelines or a contributor agreement, those kinds of things. It's been around in the various communities, JavaScript, Ruby, and so I was just wondering your take. Have you guys run into that? And it's more of just like starting the discussion about it, because I think that I know other open source maintainers, and there are people that will file issues and be pretty demanding for a fix because they're dependent upon it at work, but it's open source. And so just kind of wondering what y'all's thoughts are, if someone were to file like an issue and kind of demand a fix, but it goes against what your roadmap is, say that you're wanting to deprecate a component, and obviously they're welcome to fork it and make their own fork that they maintain. I'm just wondering what you've experienced, and then what your thoughts are about as the project grows.
As far as my experience has been, I think I've had zero negative experiences with anyone in the repo. I've dealt with hundreds of people, it seems, and everybody's been pretty cool. Maybe I've just been lucky so far, though.
Yeah, I actually second Nader. Since I've been maintaining it, I actually haven't had any interactions with users that stand out. All of them have been really nice, and even when we do a release, everyone's, if there's an issue that comes up with the release, people just file an issue, and they're not really demanding or stuff like that. So I think the community in general, especially with React Native Elements, has been really nice to work with.
Yeah, maybe we're just not big enough yet to where we haven't had that type of stuff happen. So maybe that's in our future, but hopefully we'll stay on the same course that we've seen so far.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully that never happens.
But I guess I wouldn't mind kind of switching over to kind of talk about sustainable open source in general, and let us kind of talk about what our philosophy is as far as keeping this going, and as far as money is concerned, and that type of stuff. So there's a lot of different things being thrown around now. I've seen a lot of people putting their projects up on Open Collective, or maybe they're trying to get sponsors for their projects, or there's a few other different things that I've seen going on. This is a very interesting topic to me. It's very interesting because I see a lot of projects that have a lot of potential, and I think the only way for us to kind of really get to where we need to be is to have some way to compensate either the maintainers, or to have the projects themselves kind of fuel a business. I know if you've kept up, and this is kind of just React or React Native specific, but also if you look at, first of all, let me, I guess, look at companies like Facebook, who are using, in my opinion, React Native as a recruiting pipeline. So that's one way, I guess, companies can kind of go about, keeping an open source project, or using an open source project for business objectives. But then there's also, Open Collective, which is basically putting a project out there and taking donations or taking money to pay the people that are maintaining it. And then there's another thing that I've kind of seen, and this is also specific to React and React Native. There's companies like Infinite Red, there's companies like Formidable Labs, and then even my company, React Native Training, and then there's React Training. You see companies that are using open source in a few different interesting ways. So if you go to React Training, which is Michael Jackson and Ryan Florence, they do React Training, and they also have their React router on their their documentation is on their website, and it all kind of links back into their GitHub repo, and it's a really smart idea in my opinion, because their entire business, the only way they can pay their bills is to get training. But so in order to fund their open source, they need to get business. So they're kind of linking that together. And I've kind of adopted a similar thing with React Native Training, but really for some of these projects that I'm not working on anymore that much, like React Native Elements, I feel like it's not fair to kind of go that way unless I'm spending, the bulk of my time doing it. So we've put React Native Elements on Open Collective. So like our idea, and this is just kind of an idea that we're just trying out, is to kind of get people aware that we are on Open Collective and that 100% of that money actually goes to the maintainers of the project and not myself. But I think I would like to hear other people's opinion, like, Peter and Kevin and Binoy and Monty of different, ways that this can work and the pros and cons of kind of what you think that I'm doing, good and bad, and what other people are doing. So I just guess that'll kick the discussion off.
I love it. I'm a huge advocate. I've always secretly wanted it to happen. I just didn't know how, so I never said anything about it. But like, think about it. Everybody, right? Like, sort of like how you mentioned before, Natter, with like just releasing a project. And not saying that you did this, but like, I'm sure there's people that did do this, right? Where you release any old project, you get the wheels spinning, and then a million people flock to it and make it to what, it should be, right? Like, someone just like kind of strung together a bunch of code and released it. Someone else did all the work for them, and they're sort of just taking advantage of the situation, right? Or there's times too where you have all these people using your module, right, as a maintainer, or as the creator of that package, and people are yelling at you, people are screaming at you, like, get this done. Like, what the hell's wrong with you, right? Like, I'm sure everyone here has either faced it themselves or has like seen it happen, right? And I'm just like thinking, I always think, it's like React Router, for example, they put this thing out, like, granted, yes, they're using it to advertise their platform, but at the same time, it's free, right? And there's millions, literally probably millions of companies at this point. Okay, maybe not millions, thousands of people.
There's definitely $1 million companies that are, making millions from it.
Billion-dollar companies, I bet, that are taking advantage of React Router, but people are still going on there and like screaming, like, oh, this isn't working, like, I need this working, well, then pay up and it'll fix it, just like how you have any other enterprise agreement with a company. There should be nothing should I strongly believe that if you are making, let's say, over $100,000 or $1 million per year, there should be a license that you're required to pay to use an open source project, because otherwise it's taking advantage of the situation any way you want to see it.
I think it's a great business model. And I think that just open source in general, the way it allows anyone to contribute it's just so powerful. I know this is kind of the only industry that people will look at you like you have two heads, because you're saying that you build software and you just give it away, right? I wrote some software and I just put it up for anyone to use, right? What they're not taking into consideration is that I've consumed, if I write something and put it up, I've consumed hundreds, millions of times what that is. And so I think it's absolutely fair game to use that as not only a tool for money or tool for your business, but it's also a way to gain trust. So if I see that your code's out there and you've iterated on it and it is what it is now, I'm more likely to want to use your training company because they have that resource, right? You can come in and obviously tailor a training, but you can also refer them to something that they can use in 2 minutes from now, right? And they can use in the projects that we build. I think it's absolutely huge, and that's something that you've got and the React Router guys have. They have a router that could be used in these projects, right? I think it's absolutely huge, and I think that more companies should do that. Not only, just to use as like a recruiting tool or to sell their service, but most of the companies that are out there rely quite a bit on open source. I know that I was at a company a few years ago, and there was a legal department that contacted the developers, our legal department, wanting to know if we had any items that we were developing that could be patented. And it was really interesting how that email came and how all of us kind of chimed. We were just snickering because the entire business, every single bit of it, was built on open source technology. Linux, MySQL, open source, interpreter languages, Perl and PHP, and all of these different utilities. All of this stuff was open source, and yet you have a company thinking in the mindset of patenting, a certain process of like if-else statements, right? Something silly like that. I think those companies need to kind of take a stand at and look at what they're actually using, what is helping them make their money each day, and then contribute back to those, and also contribute the work that they're doing. I think it's a great thing that companies like Airbnb and Facebook obviously are doing, that as they arrive at certain intervals, they start open sourcing it. And even like the recent native navigation, that's an experiment. And they've made some strides, but the potential of where it could go and how it could glue into something like the stuff that we're doing with React navigation, and then we have the ability to have that React navigation interface and the power of what they're demonstrating in native navigation that goes all the way down to the native modules. So I'm just a huge supporter of open source in general, and then I think that people should be compensated for doing that, because ultimately everyone wins in it. It's absolutely a win-win situation. It's a win-win-win situation because there's literally every person involved wins.
Yeah, and it's like, and it reminds me of this discussion that you hear sometimes about speaking at conferences, and there's kind of like always a debate, or should you get paid or should you not get paid? Should you be compensated or not for speaking at conferences? And people are going to argue on one end, well, speaking at conferences raises my exposure and I get better job offers and I get better consulting gigs. And then the people that are going to say the other way around are going to be like, you should get paid to speak at conferences because, they're selling tickets for this conference and they're making money off of you. I think there's a similar thing going on with open source. I believe it's like, yes, when you create an open source project, or if you contribute to an open source project, that's going to show up on your GitHub profile, and everybody knows that's how people do the hiring these days, and that's kind of how you're going to stand out in a consulting arrangement versus another competitor or two. You're going to get that just by contributing. That's going to show up, and you're going to probably make more money in your career because of that. But also, if there's a way to kind of make money for the people spending their time and their effort doing it, like we should find a way out to make that happen. And also, like I mentioned earlier, Infinite Red, Formidable Labs, and a few other companies. There's probably dozens or hundreds out there, that are paying their developers like ridiculous amounts of money to sit there and create open source projects and literally just put them out there. Some of them are not even like bringing that much business value, in my opinion, to the companies, but the actual code itself. But what it is bringing to those companies is two things: a recruiting pipeline, but also a business pipeline. So if a company is going to research, a dozen agencies, they're going to see Infinite Red, and they're going to look at their GitHub repo, and they have like a dozen awesome projects with really smart people kind of talking, and you can see everything going on. It's very transparent. And then you have this company out here that's like, you look at their website and they're like, oh, we're the experts, but there's no proof there. The GitHub repo is like the proof, so it works in that regard too, as far as like, business is concerned. And then the last thing I'll throw out there, that a parallel that I've kind of drawn is kind of like where where open source is, there's a little bit of kind of similarity, in my opinion, to how the entertainment industry has kind of gone in the music business over the last 10 or 20 years. Before, people used to sell music. Now the performers are giving away their music, but they're making their money off of performances and gigs and shows. And the more quality things that they can create and give away for free, the more value that they can bring in as a performer. And I think a lot of developers are seeing that. And I don't know if it's ever been stated that way or if it's crazy to even say that, but I kind of see that happening now. The people that are like doing that seem to be doing well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I've actually seen that business model work for a musician. So there's a guy named Matthew Mayfield, and he's like a rock musician, and he had a band that fell apart in the late 2000s, and he decided to go on his own and start releasing things online, away from a label. And he started giving things away and having the patron model, which I really think that's one thing we haven't mentioned is the patrons model. That Redux was probably the most recent success story, I guess, of the patron model, to where if you could donate whatever. And I know that Jed Watson's company, I think Mill, was one of the initial patrons for that project, and I believe Facebook obviously supported it as well. But he built a career over a number of years. This musician did, because there were people that he would release music for free. You could just go download the MP3s, and they were amazing. And he would he would say a suggested thing would be $10, but there were people that would donate $30, $50, something like that. And then he would do things essentially like what we would do with software is give this piece of software away. He would sell his notebook that he wrote the songs for in that album. He would sell it for $100 or something. Like it just the legions of fans that he built up, were that was one way that they knew that they could support him and they could get something of real value, something that was unique. So I certainly see that in this ecosystem, because you've got the patron model, and then you've got the ability to do that consulting piece, which is that uniqueness. Like anyone that has a project out there, you can approach them on GitHub or you email them, whatever. Say, I've taken, you've built this so far. It solved most of my need. What would it take? Could you consult to build this out for my unique situation? And I think a lot of business is done that way. I know a lot of business is done that way. I worked with a gentleman that continued to maintain in the late 2000s a C module that was compiled into Apache web servers for big corporations, and he continued to maintain that on a consulting basis.
Yeah, I want to pitch this idea of open source as a service, right? So if you think about specifically React Native elements, right? So let's just consider the repository for a second here. So one component, for instance, the calendar component is a lot of people want to use it, right? And we don't have it on our repository yet. And as of right now, we don't even have the time to build it out from scratch, right? I know Wix came out with a really good calendar component. And so right now we've been pointing them towards there. But so if you think about a component like calendar, right, that a lot of users want to use, you could start to think of an ecosystem where a user can submit a request that says, I really need the calendar component. And so I'd be willing to contribute $5 to whoever can build it, right? And so all of this money, whoever is willing to contribute, goes into Open Collective, and a contractor or a developer, right, that has the skills and wants to build it out, can build the component out, put it into the repository, and he'll be paid directly from Open Collective. So at the end of the day, the user gets a component that he really wanted, the developer gets paid for it, plus it's open source. So someone that actually comes 3 months into the future that wants to use the repository now has a calendar component which is open source that he can use. So I think if we start to sort of promote this idea with Open Collective, as Nader was saying, I think it can be really, really effective to scale up the repository, plus help the developer and the user as well.
I think you're onto something there. And I think that's kind of where I think that maybe, if someone can kind of like get that solidified and like someone maybe out there in the community can kind of push it along with a few other people and kind of get a well-known project that implements this and kind of gets it like, out there, I guess, in the spotlight and makes it well known. I feel like that seems to be, the best thing out there so far. Like it seems to be like the most, the idea that makes the most sense. Is there like a way to already do that with Open Collective? To like assign, I think I saw something on there like you can assign tasks. Is that correct?
I'm actually not sure. I think I'm not sure about the tasks, but I think one way to start off would be manually, where the maintainer would probably keep track of who's working on which feature, and then at the end of it would basically allocate the resources from Open Collective to that particular user or developer. But I'm not sure if there's an inbuilt way in Open Collective to do that already.
So I love that idea. I would actually want to take it one step further. So you use the example of, needing a modification to something that was open source and, paying $5 for that. And then once, a developer could see that, know that they have the skill set, implement it, and then the original requester would pay $5. I believe that there's a lot of open source that's done out of kind of passion that, people just want to help someone out. They want to solve the problem. They want to help someone out. But then there's also, I think, the ability of what we're talking about here in that, you want to, support a business or, whether it's a consulting business or a sales pipeline, et cetera. And I think that knowing what people want, this is where that niche is that if you know that I want a certain modification to a component or a piece of code, whether it's on your roadmap or not, you could provide that to me. And I do think that's worth, a lot of these modifications people want are more than $5. They're worth more than that. And so to kind of modify that business model or the model that you had, what I think would be is that users that would want that feature. So say that I want additional parameters added to a certain piece of code in a lower level. So let's just say that it's an Objective-C module in a native module. And right now that's kind of that's still in the React Native community, that's a special skill, right? I wouldn't know Objective-C, and so I would need that modification made to Objective-C, and I would want it to the Java module as well that's native. I would pay a certain amount for that feature to be implemented for me to have access to. But to make it worth a developer's while, I think that say that it were worth $500, and I would pay $25, right? So we'd make it accessible to people that if you needed that functionality, it's been built and it's available, but until it doesn't go open source until a certain ceiling is met, if that makes sense. So like until the $500, I guess bounty would be reached, then at that point it would go, that portion would go open source.
I think we need to send this episode to Open Collective and have them implement this because I think that's a genius idea.
I think it would be great, and I know that I would. There's so many issues that I would just be like, oh wow, $25, $100. Like if it was within, it's got to be reasonable for someone because to suggest a feature and then make the bounty and then have it not be that I need to pay $500 to get this feature in. $500 worth of someone's consulting time to do that. So.
And then you could like crowdsource a feature. You could be like,
exactly. Yes.
This feature is great.
Yeah.
How much would it cost?
Yeah.
And maybe some developer could come in and bid, $5,000, and then, and then somebody could come in and maybe bid 4,000, and then I'll go on there and offer, okay, I'll pay 100. The next guy might come on and pay like 200. And once we reach that threshold where the two values match, it will get built out. Oh man, that's a super. That seems like an awesome idea. I don't know if that's already in the works or if Open Collective has something like that in the pipeline, or if someone is building something like that completely separate.
And I think this is great, right? Because once sort of money gets involved, where a developer is getting paid, like say $5,000 to build a feature, the level of difficulty for that feature goes up a lot, right? So now you can have much better features and more advanced features being built out and also being used at the same time, right? So the quality of the app in general, which is open source, is going up, which is great.
Yeah, certainly. And also it's almost like I'm a huge fan of the lean startup, and to be able to, put something out there and refine it and pivot and all of that. And one of the concepts is validated learning. And if you put a component out there and it gets a lot of traction and people want more features and something more in depth, you've got validated learning that what you're doing is actually worth your while. And that's what I want when I build software, is that I want to provide something that's useful that people are going to use. And I know that people that ship software that we use to build things like React Native Elements here, you guys want to focus on the right thing. Should we do this component or that component? It comes down to priorities. And I think this kind of model can help open source projects not only pay some bills, but also help the direction of what their consumers want.
Is there anything else you guys want to discuss on the Open Collective topic?
No, I think I'm good.
Yeah, not
Cool,
really.
yeah.
It's kind of a recent thing we've put on Open Collective, I believe, in the last month. I've actually spoken with them. I have a blog post that I've actually written half of that they're going to publish on their Medium blog, along with kind of a similar discussion that we're having and my thoughts on this. The more I think about it, the more I kind of go back and edit, what I have so far. And I'm probably going to do that again after this discussion. But I'm hoping once this episode comes out and that blog post is published, I'm going to kind of talk about it on social media a little more and kind of discuss that and just kind of see what happens. It's kind of like a new idea and a new thing. And I kind of want to make sure that I kind of express my thoughts about it as well as I can, because I think it's a really interesting thing and it's kind of a new thing for us. And I want to make sure that if we do it, we kind of do it the right way.
Yeah, actually, on this topic of Open Collective, I did want to mention one thing. I just remembered that Webpack was was kind of the most recent source of popularity for this. I know I depend on Webpack quite a bit, and I was clamoring for better documentation, and the decision they made to join the Open Collective and to get all of the developers that have been working on it paid and working on it full time, I think was absolutely the right move. And it was something that I don't think would have happened without something like Open Collective being available. Because I think there's some projects that can be owned by corporations like Facebook and React and a community form around it. But the way Webpack came about and the problem it solved, it wasn't supported by Facebook, right? Not that they don't support Webpack, but Facebook doesn't use Webpack. I know that was one of the big questions that everyone had at the first React conference back a few years ago was what does Facebook use to deploy? Everyone just thought they used Webpack and they didn't. And so I think that just this big success story of Webpack and what it has done for the community. I mean, they are paying several developers full time to be able to work on something that a lot of us depend on to ship our code. So I think it's going to be awesome to see where this goes.
Yeah, Webpack is doing has kind of done a really good job being a project that we all use and we kind of like rely on. And it's like such a big part of a lot of great developments in our like ecosystem. They totally are like, the type of project that people should back. And it looks like they're getting a lot of backing and it's definitely well deserved.
Yeah, something I did want to talk about is I see a lot of large corporations, kind of traditional corporations, use a lot of this open source projects, but I don't see them kind of giving back to the community, even in terms of financial, even letting the developers spend time working on open source project while they're at work. I think that is definitely a big win. I think if people and corporations would let their developers kind of work maybe a day or 2 days just working on open source I think it benefits the community of open source as well as benefits the developers, because it definitely, open source is a great learning platform, because I learned so many things just contributing and researching on how to implement with the React Native elements. And I think if more people contribute to open source, I think they'll become better developers as well.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with that. And I would even say that it doesn't have to be a percentage of time. What I try to do is get my company to support a patch. Like if I make a patch to an existing open source project for our internal use, I just simply say, look, we should give this back because they gave us all of this code. And I literally want to, modify, 20 lines of code for our use case, but it's general enough that everyone can benefit. And I haven't received any pushback, but, even if I'm not able to get 10% of my time or 20%, even those small little patches can help quite a few people. So I think it's just important that at any level, companies would support contributing back to open source, especially if they're built off open source. That's the number one thing.
Well, before we wrap up the episode, is there anything else anyone wants to kind of talk about? All right. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get to the picks. Peter, do you have any picks tonight?
So one of the things that I've been working on in my spare time is some natural language processing. And I've had a really nice, and I went through like a bunch of different NLPs, which stands for natural language processing tools. And my favorite's been Google Cloud Platforms. Does such a good job of translating or basically breaking down like text, and it can do it in multiple languages too. Just cloud.google.com/natural-language. And I think like the first 5,000 translations are free, which is pretty awesome.
All right. Binoy, do you have any picks?
Yes, I do. I have two picks. So one of my pick would be Stephen Greider's course in Udemy about GraphQL, and then his another course about advanced React Native. I think I've pretty much seen all of his courses, and they're really good quality for beginner developers as well as someone who's trying to learn more advanced stuff with React, Redux, or GraphQL. I think he has some good content out there. And another pick would be Chain React Conf. It's going to be my first conference I'm going to, and I'm really excited to go there.
All right. Kevin, do you have any picks?
Yeah, I'll second the Stephen Gerder course on the advanced React. He dives deep down into the animated library and kind of using that for something advanced. So it's well worth it. Outside of that, I do have 4 picks, and I'll go real quick, but they're all pretty awesome. So the first pick is the Microsoft Universal Foldable Keyboard. So it is a portable keyboard that is the size of a CD case or one of those ancient backup discs. Way back in the day, CDs are kind of irrelevant these days, but it actually works over Bluetooth, and I use it. I just got it this past week. I use it with my iPad and my iPhone to like take notes, and it's real portable. So if I'm in a meeting or something, I can just pull those out and not have to have my computer around. So it's $100, but it's well worth it. So highly recommend that. A book I'm reading is called Grit: The Power of Passion and Perseverance, and it's written by a psychologist, and it just kind of takes you up and down the ladder of staying with problems and kind of persevering over things, and it does so, and it reveals all of her research in various stories in real world scenarios. So highly recommend that. And a tool that I'm looking into to use with my React Native and with my React web projects, just projects in general, is a tool called Husky, which has just come on my radar. And it's basically Git hooks, but it's doing them inside of your package JSON file, and it's making them to where they're not something that has to be run inside the user's clone once they, once they clone the repo, you don't have to tell them to do something else. Because I'd actually used another thing called, I believe it was G-hooks, and there was a little bit of, I don't know, it was real cumbersome to use that, and someone would forget to use that, so they didn't get the pre-commit hook that was there. But this seems to be the answer to a lot of my pain points of trying to do this over the years, and it's a way to kind of enforce Git hooks so that, for instance, the one I want to use is to enforce that there's a prettier process that's run on the file before it's committed. So it's called Husky. And the last one is a React Native component that I just became aware of called React Native Progress, and it seems to be one of the nicer progress bars or progress indicators that I've seen, and it's using React Art, so it should be pretty performant. So those are my picks.
All right, Monty, do you have any picks?
Yeah, I do. I have one pick. It's a talk by Adam from Expo, and the talk is called Apollo at Expo. So recently, I believe Expo used GraphQL and Apollo to re-architect their backend for the new Expo app, and it's a really good talk about how they used GraphQL and why they moved away from REST. I think he also has a Medium blog post on it, so that's definitely my pick.
All right. My pick is a article from Shelley Palmer. I hope I haven't mentioned this already, but if I have, I apologize. It's called "I'd Pay You $500,000 a year, but you can't do the work." Shelley Palmer is from what I understand, a consultant out of New York that has a pretty successful business. And he kind of talks about his struggles hiring the quality of developer that he needs. And he talks about open source a little bit, and he talks about just things that are kind of going on, in his opinion, that I don't really agree with, but it's pretty insightful. And I recommend everyone to kind of check it out, and also maybe subscribe to his email newsletter. Sends out a few emails a week that are usually pretty good articles, kind of up to date and on top of what's going on in IT and just stuff that interests me. So, okay, well, I think that'll wrap up episode 67 of React Native Radio. Monty and Binoy, thank you so much for coming on. I think this discussion ended up being pretty interesting.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Well, thanks to everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.